It was meant to be another typical episode of The Kelly Clarkson Show, filled with laughs, light-hearted banter, and celebrity interviews. But what unfolded instead would go down in TV history as one of the most explosive moments ever seen on daytime talk. The guest, Sydney Sweeney, the breakout star of Euphoria, known for her captivating performances and growing influence in Hollywood. The host, Kelly Clarkson, ever the relatable and charismatic TV personality. But when the conversation took an unexpected turn, things quickly went from friendly to fiery. Kelly welcomed Sydney to the show with her usual warmth, joking about the actress's rise to fame and her latest projects. Sydney, ever composed, played along, exchanging laughs with the host and the live audience. It was all going smoothly until Kelly steered the conversation into a more personal realm, touching on Sydney's public image and the pressures that come with being a young star in Hollywood. Kelly, while asking from a place of curiosity, couldn't have predicted how this question would land. The room seemed to shift subtly when Kelly asked about the perception of Sydney's character, Cassie, on Euphoria. The question seemed innocent enough. What did Sydney think about the way her character was received by audiences? But Sydney, who had put so much of herself into bringing Cassie to life, took a moment before responding, her eyes narrowing slightly. She spoke about the complexities of her character, explaining how her portrayal wasn't as simple as it appeared on screen. But Kelly, perhaps unknowingly, pressed it further, probing deeper into Sydney's thoughts on how the audience's reactions shaped her perception of the role. The tone shifted. Sydney, usually calm and collected, began to show signs of frustration. She explained how actors sometimes struggle with the expectations placed on their characters, especially when the lines between fiction and reality blur. Kelly seemed taken aback, her usual easy rapport with guests suddenly feeling like it was straining under the weight of the conversation. Kelly, sensing the shift but perhaps not fully grasping the gravity of Sydney's discomfort, attempted to clarify her point by referencing Sydney's past roles and how they seemed to align with the more controversial elements of Cassie's storyline. She asked if Sydney ever felt conflicted playing such a vulnerable, sometimes criticized character. The question was valid but landed awkwardly, especially when Sydney's expression tightened. Sydney, who had been patiently trying to explain her feelings, now found herself visibly upset. She answered with less patience, her tone a little sharper than before. She spoke of how actors, especially women, are often pigeonholed into certain roles that are defined by their sexuality or emotional fragility, which only added to the criticism her character faced. The conversation, once light-hearted, was now taking a much darker turn, leaving a palpable tension in the air. It was clear that Kelly had not anticipated the growing discomfort from her guest. What started as an innocent discussion about acting had unintentionally become a confrontation about deeper issues of body image, gender, and the complexities of Hollywood's treatment of young actresses. As Sydney spoke, her voice grew quieter but more resolute, her eyes locked with Kelly's. She explained that the audience's expectations of actresses often pushed them to their limits, and sometimes, it was just too much. Kelly, perhaps realizing the shift, attempted to backpedal. She made an apology, acknowledging that she hadn't meant to upset Sydney, and that she understood the pressures that come with fame. But the words seemed to miss the mark. Sydney, still holding her composure, shook her head slightly, explaining that apologies weren't always the solution. She needed understanding, not just surface-level acknowledgement of the situation. The studio audience, sensing the tension, fell silent. Kelly, usually the one in control of the conversation, now seemed to be on the back foot. She tried to steer the conversation back to lighter topics, suggesting they move on to discuss Sydney's upcoming projects. But Sydney, visibly frustrated now, stood up from her seat, her body language signaling that she was done with the conversation. She said, "I'm sorry, Kelly, but this just isn't right." Sydney's sudden stand-up was enough to stun the audience. Kelly's face, a mixture of confusion and concern, watched as Sydney began to walk toward the stage exit. The show's producers scrambled in the background, unsure of how to react. Kelly, seemingly at a loss for words, apologized again, her voice wavering. Sydney, however, did not turn around. She kept walking, her face composed but clearly resolute. The exit wasn't dramatic in a traditional sense, but the sheer surprise of it left an indelible mark on everyone present. The live broadcast, filled with awkward silence, abruptly cut to a commercial break. Kelly, now sitting alone on the stage, took a moment to gather herself before addressing the audience. "Well, that was unexpected," she said, her voice softer than usual. "But I want to thank Sydney for being here." As the cameras cut away, social media exploded. Clips of the moment flooded platforms, with fans and commentators alike debating what had happened. Some defended Sydney, praising her for standing up for herself in a moment when it would have been easier to stay quiet. Others criticized Kelly, claiming she had crossed a line with her questioning, not recognizing the emotional toll her words might have had on her guest. News outlets picked up the story almost immediately, dissecting every part of the exchange. Some outlets speculated that Kelly had been too pushy, while others argued that the conversation was just part of the natural ebb and flow of talk show interviews. But no one could deny the power of the moment. It was raw, unfiltered, and real, and in the world of celebrity interviews, that was something rare. The following day, Kelly took to social media to address the incident, offering a heartfelt apology to Sydney and anyone who had been affected by the exchange. She explained that her intention had always been to have an open, honest conversation, but acknowledged that she hadn't fully understood the emotional weight of her questions. "I respect Sydney immensely and will always support her," Kelly wrote, adding, "I'm sorry if I made her feel uncomfortable." Sydney, for her part, remained silent on the matter for several days. Fans began to speculate whether she would address the walk-off directly, but she chose instead to continue promoting her upcoming work. When she finally spoke, it wasn't about the confrontation but about the importance of mental health and the pressures that come with fame. In her statement, she thanked her fans for their support, but remained firm in her belief that it was essential to set boundaries in the industry. The aftermath of the incident sparked a broader conversation about the mental health of young celebrities, particularly women, in the spotlight. Mental health advocates used the moment to highlight the importance of empathy in interviews, reminding hosts and audiences alike that celebrities are human beings, not just entertainment commodities. The next few days saw a surge in interviews with mental health professionals discussing the emotional toll of fame. Many pointed to the pressures Sydney had faced as an example of how even the most successful and talented individuals can be pushed to their limits. The conversation shifted from the walk-off itself to a larger cultural issue, one that went beyond talk shows and into the way society views celebrities. As Sydney continued to promote her projects, she became a symbol of resilience and self-care in an industry that often demands more than it gives. Fans applauded her for setting boundaries and taking control of her narrative, making her an even more relatable figure in the eyes of many. It was a moment of empowerment, one that resonated deeply with people across the world. Kelly, too, found herself reflecting on the incident. Interviews with other celebrities during the following weeks were more attuned to their emotional well-being, with Kelly expressing a renewed commitment to fostering a supportive, empathetic environment on her show. Some fans even saw this as a form of growth for Kelly, as she appeared more sensitive to the needs of her guests. The incident sparked a wave of reflection within the television industry. Talk show producers, especially those dealing with high-profile celebrities, began reevaluating the tone and content of their interviews. There was an increased focus on training hosts to be more mindful of the emotional landscape of their guests, recognizing that some questions, though well-intentioned, can have unintended consequences. Sydney's walk-off, though brief, changed the way many saw celebrity interviews. It was a reminder that the world of entertainment isn't all glitz and glamour. It's a world filled with pressures, expectations, and challenges that most people can't even begin to understand. For Sydney, it became a defining moment in her career, a moment where she showed the world that it was okay to stand up for yourself. As the weeks went by, the incident faded from the headlines, but its impact remained. Celebrities began to share more openly about the challenges of being in the public eye, and fans became more aware of the toll it took. Sydney's walk-off became part of a larger conversation about mental health, fame, and the importance of respecting personal boundaries. The incident also highlighted how quickly media can distort moments like these. While many outlets reported the walk-off as a dramatic clash, others focused on the underlying issue of pressuring celebrities to answer tough questions about their personal lives. The division in the media coverage was a reflection of the complexity of the situation. For Kelly, the experience was a reminder of the fine line between curiosity and sensitivity. It was a difficult lesson, but one that many saw her learning with grace. By acknowledging the mistake and learning from it, Kelly was able to regain the trust of her audience and her guests. The story of Sweeney storming off the Kelly Clarkson Show would go down in television history not because of shouting or chaos, but because of how quietly powerful the moment was. It showed how discomfort doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it builds slowly, word by word, until stepping away becomes the only form of self-preservation left. Fans continued to debate whether the confrontation could have been avoided, but many agree that live television leaves little room for correction once emotions surface. Sydney's decision to leave wasn't seen as weakness by her supporters, but as clarity, a moment where personal well-being outweighed public expectation. In Hollywood circles, the incident became a private talking point, with actors discussing how often interviews push into emotional territory under the guise of relatability. Sydney's walk-off quietly challenged the norm, forcing the industry to question how much access celebrities truly owe the public. Over time, the viral clip slowed, replaced by longer discussions and think pieces examining the responsibility of media platforms. What began as a shocking moment slowly transformed into a case study on empathy, consent, and the unseen emotional labor behind celebrity appearances. Sydney moved forward without revisiting the confrontation directly, letting her work speak instead. That silence became part of the message, reinforcing that not every moment requires explanation, and that sometimes the most powerful response is choosing peace over performance. In the end, the fiery confrontation wasn't remembered for anger, but for impact. It reminded audiences that even under bright studio lights, boundaries matter, voices deserve care, and walking away can be just as meaningful as staying and fighting. Long after the episode aired, fans continued revisiting the moment, noticing the subtle cues that hinted at Sydney's growing discomfort. The pauses, the measured responses, and the way her posture shifted all suggested that the decision to leave wasn't sudden, but carefully considered in real time under immense pressure. Online discussions gradually moved beyond blame and toward understanding. Viewers began acknowledging how easily a conversation can cross invisible lines, especially when personal experiences are turned into public talking points. Sydney's reaction resonated with many who had felt similarly cornered in their own lives. Entertainment journalists later noted that the confrontation reflected a generational shift in Hollywood. Younger actors are increasingly vocal about mental health, agency, and consent in media spaces, and Sydney's walk-off became a quiet symbol of that evolving mindset. The moment also sparked debate about how women in the industry are often expected to remain agreeable, regardless of discomfort. Sydney's refusal to play along challenged that expectation, earning her praise from advocates who saw the act as one of self-respect rather than defiance. Kelly Clarkson's handling of the aftermath was widely discussed as well. Many appreciated that she did not escalate the situation or dismiss Sydney's feelings, instead choosing reflection and accountability, which helped soften the polarized reactions surrounding the incident. Behind the scenes, sources suggested the production team reviewed interview protocols, emphasizing clearer communication with guests about sensitive topics. While unconfirmed publicly, the shift was noticeable to longtime viewers who sensed a more cautious tone in later episodes. Sydney's fanbase grew more protective, rallying around her not just as an actress, but as a young woman navigating relentless scrutiny. Her choice to prioritize emotional safety strengthened her connection with audiences who valued authenticity over polished appearances. The confrontation also reignited conversations about the cost of fame at a young age. Critics pointed out how rapidly success can strip individuals of privacy, turning personal struggles into discussion points for public consumption. Months later, the incident was referenced in broader discussions about interview ethics, particularly in live television. Media analysts used it as an example of how quickly intent can be overshadowed by impact, regardless of good intentions. Sweeney continued taking on challenging roles, her performances praised for their depth and vulnerability. To many, her professional choices reinforced that the walk-off had not harmed her career, but instead highlighted her confidence and self-awareness. Kelly's show also evolved, with guests opening up in more structured, consent-driven conversations. The change suggested that lessons had been learned, even if never explicitly stated on air. Over time, the fiery confrontation became less about conflict and more about growth on both sides. It stood as proof that uncomfortable moments can lead to meaningful change when handled with maturity rather than ego. Fans looking back often described the incident as a human moment in an otherwise polished media landscape. It reminded viewers that celebrities are not immune to emotional boundaries, no matter how accustomed they are to the spotlight. The story endured not because of outrage, but because of relatability. Many saw themselves in Sweeney's decision, recognizing the courage it takes to step away when a situation no longer feels safe or respectful. In the end, Sweeney's walk-off was remembered as more than a dramatic exit. It became a lasting reminder that even on live television, personal limits deserve respect, and sometimes the strongest statement is simply choosing to leave. As time passed, the incident was increasingly framed as a turning point rather than a controversy. Commentators began noting how moments like these reshape expectations for celebrity interviews, encouraging a culture where emotional safety is valued alongside transparency and openness. Viewers who initially tuned in for entertainment found themselves reflecting on their own communication styles. Many admitted the exchange made them more aware of how easily questions, even well-meaning ones, can feel invasive when asked in public settings. Sweeney's quiet resolve after the walk-off became part of her public image, reinforcing the idea that strength does not always appear loud or confrontational. For many fans, her silence spoke louder than any follow-up interview ever could. Industry professionals later cited the moment in discussions about media training, emphasizing the importance of setting clear boundaries before cameras start rolling. The lesson was simple but powerful: clarity beforehand can prevent discomfort on air. Kelly Clarkson's continued success also played a role in reframing the narrative. By moving forward without defensiveness, she demonstrated that growth often comes from listening rather than reacting, a response that earned renewed respect from many viewers. The confrontation subtly influenced how audiences consume viral clips, encouraging some to seek full context instead of relying on short excerpts. That shift reflected the growing awareness of how easily narratives can be shaped by selective editing. Sweeney's future interviews appeared more intentional, with clearer framing around topics she was willing to discuss. Fans appreciated the transparency, seeing it as a healthy evolution rather than a retreat from openness. Over time, the moment was referenced less as a scandal and more as an example of emotional intelligence in action. It showed that choosing to disengage can be a thoughtful decision rather than an impulsive one. Conversations about consent and storytelling gained momentum, with advocates pointing to the walk-off as proof that personal stories should always remain optional, even for public figures. The incident also reminded audiences that live television carries real consequences. Unlike scripted drama, there are no retakes, making empathy and awareness essential tools for everyone involved. Fans revisiting the episode years later often described it as surprisingly calm in hindsight. What once felt shocking now appeared measured, highlighting how perspective changes once emotions cool. Sweeney's career continued to thrive, further dispelling fears that asserting boundaries would lead to professional backlash. Her success became reassurance for others navigating similar pressures. Kelly's show remained a space for conversation, but with a noticeably gentler touch. Viewers sensed renewed emphasis on mutual respect, even during challenging discussions. Ultimately, the fiery confrontation left behind a quiet legacy. It encouraged more thoughtful dialogue, reminding both media and audiences that humanity should never be sacrificed for spectacle. In retrospect, the moment stood as a reminder that authenticity sometimes disrupts comfort, but it also opens the door to growth. Sweeney's decision to walk away transformed a tense exchange into a lasting lesson about respect, awareness, and the power of knowing when enough is enough. Years later, the moment was still referenced whenever discussions turned to the evolving relationships between celebrities and media platforms. What once seemed like an uncomfortable interruption was now often cited as an example of how public conversations are slowly learning to respect emotional limits rather than bulldoze through them for the sake of ratings. Fans who discovered the clip long after its original airing often reacted with surprise, expecting something louder or more chaotic. Instead, they found a restrained, emotionally charged exchange that felt painfully real, reinforcing how powerful quiet resistance can be in a culture obsessed with spectacle. Media critics began comparing the incident to older talk show confrontations, noting how different this moment felt. There were no insults, no raised voices, just a growing realization that the conversation had crossed an invisible line that could not be uncrossed. Sydney's handling of the aftermath continued to be praised for its restraint. By refusing to sensationalize the moment or fuel outrage, she allowed the narrative to mature naturally, shifting focus away from conflict and toward understanding. The confrontation also influenced how fans viewed interviews moving forward. Audiences became more attentive to body language and tone, recognizing signs of discomfort they might once have overlooked in favor of entertainment. For aspiring actors, the moment became quietly instructive. It showed that career longevity does not depend on endless compliance, and that professionalism can include knowing when to step away rather than endure something that feels wrong. Kelly Clarkson's willingness to absorb criticism without retaliation further softened the legacy of the exchange. Her response demonstrated that accountability does not require public self-flagellation, only genuine reflection and change. Over time, the clip was shared less with outrage-driven captions and more with thoughtful commentary. The shift reflected a broader cultural fatigue with manufactured drama and a growing appreciation for nuance. In classrooms and workshops focused on media ethics, the incident was sometimes used as an example of how consent and context matter, even in environments designed for openness and vulnerability. Sydney's continued success helped cement the idea that asserting boundaries does not derail ambition. Instead, it can reinforce credibility, signaling confidence and self-awareness to both audiences and industry peers. The story's longevity lay in its relatability. Nearly everyone has experienced a moment when staying felt harder than living, and seeing that choice reflected on television gave it unexpected emotional weight. As public discourse evolved, the confrontation came to represent a shift away from endurance culture, challenging the notion that discomfort must always be tolerated to prove strength or professionalism. Even as newer viral moments replaced it in headlines, the Sydney Sweeney walk-off retained a quiet relevance, resurfacing whenever conversations turned toward empathy, power dynamics, or personal agency. Looking back, many agreed the incident did not expose weakness in either woman, but humanity in both. Two people with different perspectives met, clashed briefly, and chose not to escalate. In the end, the full story endured because it offered no easy conclusions. It simply showed that sometimes the most honest thing a person can do, even in front of millions, is recognize their limit and choose themselves.